hilariously bad. So we will see. I think it's okay. It says it's setting up. All right. Zoom arrow YouTube.
Okay. We can do that. Are we live?
I believe in a moment. Yep.
Okay.
The live on YouTube is already on my screen, so I assume
That's what it says on my screen.
Yes. Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Excellent. Hello, YouTube. Yes. All right. Great. So yes. So this is the intern break room. Hooray! Yay! Yeah. So I'm Nicole Himel. I'm a research manager at Nonviolence International New York. Aidan is with us as always. Aidan, who are you? What do you do?
Hi, I'm Aidan. I am a video production volunteer at Nonviolence International New York. Yeah.
And then we also have Sarah and Parker with us. Sarah Parker, who are you? What do you do?
I'm Sarah. I work as a research analyst with the Arizona Research Center at Nonviolence International New York.
I am Parker and Parker Dolton, and I am a research analyst, and I work with civil society engagement.
Awesome. Cool beans. Oh, cool. Now I feel like I can relax. Because like did all the things, you know, I love Wednesdays so much. But like I am insane, right? On Wednesdays, because it's just like boom, 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 boom. So everything happens. And then by the time we get to the intern break room, it's like, all right, made it. Pushed all the buttons, did all the things, taking a break. So yeah. Okay, so Sarah couldn't make the workshop this morning. So I was thinking maybe we could talk a little bit about it to kind of catch her up. And I'm sure she has all kinds of ideas and information and maybe even some research that's like slightly related. Let's see. I don't know, Parker, you haven't joined us before, so you should talk the most, I think.
Perfect. Love talking. Okay, just a little bit about what we talked about and what we learned this morning. We had a webinar discussion with the DC branch of Nonviolence International, and we talked about environmentalism, and we talked about the climate crisis and some of the intersections that the climate crisis presents. Yeah, it was very, very interesting. I learned a lot personally. I learned a lot about specific terminology and also we had very interesting discussions about how to engage with different individuals and how we should be engaging. So overall, it was a fantastic event, and yeah, I was very impressed. So it was a great event. What are some of your ideas on environmentalism?
I want to ask a quick question first, because I wasn't at this webinar. Like, what sort of angle did they approach it from? Was it more focusing on like climate migrants or like activism or like high level goals like the SDGs? Like, I'm curious what angle they approached it from, because the climate crisis is really complicated. And so there are a lot of ways to talk about it and how to make progress, etc.
Fair. I would say that it was mostly built around an activist sort of lens. As you just pointed out, though, it is a very complex and large discussion. So of course, there were a lot of different subtopics, but I'd say the largest kind of framework that we can think about it through is in terms of activism and how to be as effective as environmental activists as we can, and how to become engaged.
Mm-hmm.
You guys
Yeah,
agree?
they kind of like went through, they did like a short history, and then like talking about like a wide variety of topics. And I learned a lot about, well, is ecofeminism? Is that what happened?
think it was
Ecofeminism.
queer ecology.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
sorry.
there's one
Queer
term
ecology.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, queer ecology. That was cool. Sarah, do you already know about that?
I've heard of it. I don't know a ton about it, but
Yeah. I'd never heard of it. People know more.
Yeah, I hadn't either.
I had never heard of it either.
yeah,
it kind of blew my
I've done
mind.
a decent amount of like climate justice work, and doing that kind of stuff you'll meet people who got into environmentalism for a whole range of reasons. So yeah, it's one of those things that someone brings up like, yeah, I'm really into like queer ecology, and you're like, I'm gonna Google that later because I don't know what's happening right now and I don't want to ask because it's gonna be weird.
Oh my god.
So do you know a lot about it?
No, still I don't know a lot about it. I'm trying.
We gotta see if we can get you the slides. They're pretty good. We could also all Google it like right now or like anytime ever. The amount of things that I feel like that's like every experience that I've ever had where it's like, oh, here's a new idea, and you're like, oh yeah,
Like for sure.
yeah.
This is how you have like 100 notes files in the app on your phone, and you're like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna look that up later. Yeah, that's really interesting. And then you open it and you're like, just an infinite list of like things you should Google and read more about.
The worst is so I have an academic planner, and so here we are. August is Saturday. So that means I have a new planner to play with. I'm very excited. I learned a lot from this last one. How do I visualize items? Great. So in the back, I usually put like a list of like books. So every time somebody's like has a good book recommendation, I always write it down in my list of books that I want to read. And I need to not hate myself for like never finishing any of those books on that list. That's like my new challenge. I guess because it's just like a list of failure. Like I didn't read any of these books. If there's not like a club or if it's not for a class or something, then I read articles, but like a whole book is like, man, I never read books.
That's a lot to commit to. Especially if it's not for like a specific purpose. But yeah, I think I definitely could be better about that too. So don't beat yourself up because up. So you're doing great.
Talking about queer ecology, I'm reminded of I took a class in my freshman year called Law's Nature, and it was about the ways in which like law deals with nature, and the idea of like an act of God being like a flood or something,
Insurance, but
also like how we conceive of animals as being rights bearing or not rights bearing, and the treatment of animals. And one of the big things we dealt with was this. I was reading a little bit about queer ecology just now, and it seems like one of the fundamental things, and we talked about this a little in the discussion group, is the idea that humans and nature are separate, and that some things belong in the natural world, and then there are human things which do not belong in the natural world and are somehow like above that. But we talked about how it's absurd to make that dualism, because fundamentally we are part of nature. We came from nature, and there's no meaning in trying to separate out what is a natural thing and what isn't.
So on that, do you guys know about accretion? Like, do you know how this planet exists?
Planet accretion is absolutely insane.
I like learned about it in like my last year of my undergrad. And never before at any moment. And I was like, I'm an adult, and I just like had my mind blown like wide open, like a child, like, hearing for the first time or something. Anyway, yeah.
What is it? I don't know anything about this.
Parker, do you want to explain accretion?
Sure. There was a time when after the Big Bang, when and I love that this is where our discussion is taking us. There was a time after the Big Bang that planets were forming, and how they formed is basically they would there was a period of bombardment, so they would bombard into each other, and then they would grab little particles and slowly accrete into these kind of very, very hot mass forms, and then eventually they became planets. And in fact, actually, accretion is how we actually have the moon. The moon actually came from the Earth, and a meteor hit the Earth, and then the moon was so big that it wasn't able to escape. So that's why we have the moon, and it's so big compared to other moons. So that's a little bit about accretion, and the elements that during that time, the elements that came together and slowly over billions of years formed these planets. Absolutely mind-boggling to learn about this stuff. So cool.
Because like essentially it's the same thing. Because like the thing I love about space is that physics is the same everywhere, you know, where it's like, and also like it's the same material. So like we're all just like these different combinations of like carbon and hydrogen. And the reason why we even like are able to manifest things is just because of the temperature that stuff melts at, you know? And so what happened is like the sun is at the middle, right? And like I guess it exploded or something, and like that's how it exists. And then like there's like little bits and pieces of everything. And so because the sun is, you know, gravity, right? It's like pulling all this stuff, and it's like very pulley. I'm sorry. You know, it's like it's all the same material, and just like over time, you know, everything's like spinning in like this disc, and it just starts bumping into things, and then it creates its own gravity, and then blah blah blah. And then like it's planets. Because in my head I don't know why I never like thought about it before, or never like made the connection that like the Earth didn't just get like, you know, like spat out and like exists like as an Earth, you know. It's like, and then there's Earth. It's like, no, it's like all of this, like even like everything in the solar system is really connected, you know, because it comes from the same thing, right? Because we are the sun, and like everything about everything you've ever known or could possibly know is the sun. You know. So I just can't really believe that that's real, and we live that. So nature, space, and it's cool.
Yeah.
I definitely had heard of that. I'd never heard it called that before, though. That's so interesting.
In our little discussion groups earlier, I've been thinking about something recently, and I want to like see what people think about it, which is just like, I think it comes from whatever that book is about, the people who made a bunch of money off the 2008 recession. But basically the idea is, we don't like thinking about disastrous calamities to the extent where, because they're so crazy big and huge and life-changing, we just think they can't happen, right? Like, because and that was what the person who did it, he wrote like a whole book on how he's made a career off of finding things people don't think can happen or are afraid to think will happen. They consistently like lower the probability that thing will happen, right? They underestimate how likely it is that, say, the market will crash because of a housing crisis. And like that mode of thinking is exactly the problem with, in my opinion, with why people are not as upset about the ecology, because like you can't, if you accept that climate change is real and you accept that we have to do something about it, then you're also, in order to do that, you accept that this insanely disastrous thing could happen to you in your lifetime. And it's too big and too scary to even think about for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And just like, how do you get around that?
I find the other really big roadblock people hit is like lots of other large scale things that you feel like could happen to you, like even a market crash kind of thing. You feel like there are things you could do. Like you could move what money of yours is in stocks or in mutual funds or whatever. Like you can shift that kind of stuff around to some extent, obviously. But I think the climate crisis has such a big problem that like so much of this is based in like corporations or like multinationals or in government action or in like lots of things that feel very intangible. And so I feel like even a lot of people who are like, yes, I believe scientists, and yes, I think the climate crisis is going to happen in the next few decades, hit this kind of point of like, okay, well, like I can compost, I guess, and like I recycle, like I'm not a terrible person, but then they're like,
Right.
I don't know what else I can do. And I
Mhm.
think the like vastness and like can kind of make it feel really futile to invest a lot of like time or money or effort into action around the climate crisis, because you're like, well, we're all screwed unless like the CEO of ExxonMobil suddenly wakes up and decides like, hey, maybe I like Earth. Like,
That's why I want to work on that. Like, that's the biggest thing that I want to work on. Is just like, because I mentioned, that's why I mentioned corporate social responsibility, because it's a really interesting field that's like changed a lot, like in the last 5 years, and will change a lot more in the next 5. And it's basically like trying to get like companies and people that are a part of them to like kind of remember that like they're human and that they're a part of this, and that, you know, we have like all these machines that produce this one thing, and like that's money, right? And that's cool, but we have to decide like what else they're producing and see if it matters more than, you know, money sometimes. And then the other thing with like the climate activism that I've done is we have like a lot of groups within like Citizens Climate Lobby, where they talk to like different energy people, right? And people that work in energy, and like the guy that's like in charge of like the whole Texas region is like a big he comes from energy, and like he works there. And it's like, it's definitely possible, but it's really interesting because a lot of times like the narrative around it is very from what I've kind of experienced and noticed, that people that work in energy get really frustrated and feel really alienated, because they're like, well, you don't even know, like, you know, you take all this for granted, and, you know, like we provide all this stuff for you, and like we're, you know, we're important, and like we work really hard at creating all of these energy infrastructures, and you want to like change everything, and like you're ungrateful and also ignorant about like what we do, is kind of the vibe. And I think it's really interesting because it's like, I'm kind of, I know that for myself, like I'm willing to change like how I consume energy. And, you know, I'm flexible if it saves us, you know? So it's like, you know, maybe we should have to like have more conversations around like acknowledging like it is complicated, but like also like, you know, we have to change, so we'll figure it out.
I don't know. I find myself very skeptical of like being able to change the minds of like billionaires. Like I don't know. I mean, one thing to note is like, yeah, we're all human, but the thing is, the wealthy, they're not going to experience the effects of climate change in the same way we are. You know,
100%.
We talked about it a little in the earlier discussion, but you know, like they can move to somewhere that doesn't have natural disasters. They're not going to go hungry. They're not going to go thirsty. In fact, maybe they'll be able to pivot into some other industry that, you know, benefits from the exploitation of people who are suffering under you know, a climate crisis. Like, I don't think you can make it an argument of self-interest to them necessarily. Also, a lot of them are old and aren't necessarily even going to be around for the worst of it.
But I also think that there's an opportunity to shift, because I understand what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I think that there is an opportunity to shift the dialogue and shift the ways in which these large corporations start to think and start to organize and invest their money and people. As Nicole was saying, I've seen, with especially living near Silicon Valley, I've seen a lot of different positions start to appear over the last couple of years. Social responsibility advocate, and a lot of these positions that weren't ever a thing even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so I think that there can be a shift in the way that companies start to be socially responsible. There was an interesting study done that showed that qualified applicants to a job would actually rather work for a company or organization that is socially responsible, and they had different criteria. But I think that a lot of people who are graduating from grad school are wanting to find ways that they can make a difference, and also do more of a traditional business path as well. And I think there is a position that a lot of these companies are starting to pivot towards and can continue to build towards. And maybe I'm just an optimist, but I have seen some changes instituted, and I think that there can continue to be changes that can help with that.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
I think I'm just inherently skeptical. Like I feel like you're inherently optimistic, and I'm inherently like, I don't know, if you're making like $1 million or $1 billion a year and you've just been hanging, like there's some part of me that worries about like how performative having like, this idea of like, oh, like we have this consultant that will make sure that we are not jerks, but just not enough of jerks that like the New York Times won't run a story about like some terrible thing we did to like pollute a river in India or something. Like, it feels a little
also
like
a lot of
standard.
Media, a lot of their marketing and media is focused on the steps that they are doing, rather than, and they're putting a lot of effort and money towards showing that they're doing something rather than investing that and actually doing something. So I completely understand that there is a performative aspect of it in a lot of corporate culture. And I still think that if we compare Silicon Valley of today versus 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I think that we're making a lot of good steps in the right direction. And I think that over the next 20 years, as more and more people start to want to have that corporate responsibility, I think that companies will naturally have to change the way in which they operate to adjust for a different applicant source. So people will be demanding that companies fit these different criteria, and these companies will have to start shifting. That being said, it's a gradual process, and that gradualism can be very, very frustrating, given that this climate change that we're facing, this climate crisis, is an exponential problem. And as companies gradually get better and better, the environmental destruction is getting worse and worse at an alarming rate. So I can understand that there's a disconnect there. But those are just some of my opinions. Do you guys agree, disagree?
I strongly disagree. I see where I'm very reminded right now of.
I'm going to bring up international human rights law in a little bit, so go ahead, Aidan.
Okay. I'm very reminded right now of the state the Democrats are in. And these just awful like little crumbs that they give out when, or they I guess they quote unquote fight for, when it's so far from anything that's needed right now. I mean, I don't know how many people heard, but the support for two things, like legalization of marijuana and the Medicare for all, those two things, like the support for them is over 50% nationally and like 80% in the Democratic Party. But I think it was yesterday, the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, voted on them, and both proposals lost like 70-30. Anyway, connecting back to this, what I'm saying is people who are in power, they don't want to let go of it. and they're willing to give you these little crumbs, you know, like, oh, you know, Biden will famously shoot you in the leg instead of the heart. If you remember that quote. But these things are not enough. I mean, when you hire, as you say, when you do these PR things, and oh, you know, like, yes, like the people themselves, the people who are going into these companies are asking for the companies to do more. But I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it's going to take 20, 30 years. We need to stop our carbon footprint. We need to cut it to zero in like 5 years. Like we needed to do it 10 years ago. We don't have time for 20 years of gradualism to maybe, I mean, our current carbon footprint, like the current CO2 concentrations, I was just looking at a graph, they're 400 right now. And in the 90s, they were 350 parts per million. Like it, as you say, it's exponential. It's going up. It's not that we haven't even stopped it from going up. If in 20 years we get it to stop going up, that's nowhere near enough. Yeah, I am very cautious of incremental changes because we just don't have time.
100%. So I was going to talk about power and I was going to talk about performance, right? But you already talked about power, so you're already going to knock that out for me. So thanks so much, Aidan. But when it comes, it's so interesting that we talk about, you know, oh, like the companies are just like pretending like they're doing enough, but they don't really care. What I love about what I've learned about international human rights law is that that's what the state does. Like that's what every government, like nobody actually cares. Like they kind of do. Like and what is a country, right? Like what is a business? What is a country? It's a bunch of people, right? And like there are people in there, right? And they're trying to do certain things. But like, yeah, like you have to really call companies out, you have to call countries out, and like, you know, hopefully there are mechanisms that are around, and there are currently, you know, in the works, there are lots of like different ways to kind of measure how a company is doing on like different social responsibility aspects. Corporate social responsibility is like largely determined by what the company is kind of comfortable with dealing with. And then of course, like it's within, it's in-house, right? I mean, that's why it would be good if we had like a national human rights institute that like, you know, maybe was like government funded, and it could be kind of like a, you know, the people's like review process. Cause all we have right now are like, attract talent. Like the biggest one is attract talent, right? It's like all these young people, they're woke AF, you know, they're coming out of college, they're not going to want to work for your company if you don't have a little bit of like social corporate responsibility stuff going on. And you look at like where you source your material, or you have like some kind of diversity and inclusion initiative thing like checked, right? And like that is true. And you know, that's a part of the like the way that we move people. But Sarah, to your point, and this is something I always think about, like, you know, and thinking about, can billionaires change, right? I always think about how I'm sure the figure has changed, like with inflation, but there's a dollar amount, right, where it was $80,000 a year, right, where everything's covered, like you're done. You know, you don't need to make more than $80,000 a year. Nobody does. Like you're done. Like between that and your you know, Social Security, like you never have to worry about anything ever again, if you don't like consume all of your money and like buy a bajillion yachts, right? So that makes me think that there's this huge wide swath of everybody who makes more than $80,000 a year, which is like enough people that are also interested and have like all of their Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, where they don't need to just consume until they explode, right? But the problem with humans is that's what we do. Like we always figure out like, you know, more. Like we know how to turn on the more button, and we don't know how to stop that. So like learning how to stop, you know, pressing the dopamine button like is like the trick of the generation and like of our species right now. Like how do we stop getting high off of our excess, right? So I think it's really beautiful and amazing, and 100% agree, right? That we have, like, the science doesn't lie. Nature, the earth needs what it needs, and we need to reduce carbon by like whatever it is, you know? And like those metrics need to be met. And in order for them to be met, we need to figure out what are the blockages internally that like need to be stopped, like in all of these systems. Because ultimately, it's gonna be like the people that have the most power, they are the ones that need to change. So we need to figure out like what's wrong with them so that like they can like actually do that. And at the same time, because they're human, if we figure out like what we need to change about ourselves internally, give us a better, way to understand like what other people need to do, right? Because like changing yourself and like changing other people's behavior, that happens at the same time, right? And I definitely don't want us to get stagnated and lose the momentum of thinking that it's other people that like we don't have any interaction with. And that's why it's so important to be able to call out businesses and companies, because like we need to constantly communicate like this is not okay, you need to change. So those are kind of my thoughts about like the state handling human rights abuses versus corporations handling human rights like initiatives. Yeah, and corporate social responsibility as like a means of like figuring out stuff. They can do it. They can do it. Any human being is capable of great transformation.
Yeah, this for me kind of, I've been thinking a lot about this with the mask debate, and kind of this idea of like socialization. So like obviously everyone who grows up in the same society is socialized in a very similar system, obviously through formal education, but also cultural norms, like those kinds of things that you come to accept as normal. And I wonder if that could also be a component of dealing with the climate crisis, both because I think it invites the possibility of individual change, and also because like if you pursued a project of socialization that rather than advocating for like American individualism, advocated for like some sort of like collective responsibility, whether that's national or international collective responsibility, I feel like that would hugely transform priorities. And then if it was like shameful to be like, no, I deserve to not wear a mask, or no, I deserve to not take any climate migrants, or no, I like deserve to be able to buy as much fossil fuel as I want. Like all of those things, could be solved by
barrels in the back room right there.
Yeah, but if you could be like, no, that's shameful, like you would be looked down upon for making those choices because you would be seen as like a public danger. Your individualism makes other people's security of person less safe. I think you could kind of, because like so much of how we've accepted that things run, it's like, well, it's fine that lots of people have tons and tons of money because I would like to be that person who has tons and tons of money. Whereas instead, if it was like, wow, it sucks that some people have tons and tons of money because spread out over all of us, that could pay for health insurance, that could pay for housing, that could pay for like, I think that the like shifting towards a kind of collective responsibility model could help train people in a way that plays on like the instinctive human desire to like live in groups and be liked. And those are very fundamental things that I've been thinking a lot about, especially because it's just so hard to talk to people about like climate change and climate justice and stuff. And it has been a lot of like, okay, like even if you aren't gonna have to migrate for your home, or you don't work on a farm, like think about how you are part of this like bigger system, and all of these things will affect you.
So it's interesting that you bring up shame, Sarah, because shame is like the hot topic right now. And I believe Dr. Brene Brown says that shame is not a social justice tool. But the reason why she says that is because the way that we use shame is about excluding people from like different groups, right? And so I think there is a pressure, and so like there's difference between like shame and guilt, right? And then there's a whole bunch of theory with that. I won't bring it up here, I guess, too much because I feel like I talk too much. But I think that what we're seeing with people like not wearing masks is that they feel like they have a responsibility to a different group, and that they are being pitted against another group. So I feel like they've already like people have already tried to shame them, right? Like and like maybe not intentionally, maybe not like as a thing. I think when somebody doesn't have a mask, I know that I would personally be like, what are you doing? Even though like in my neighborhood, like everyone, I just don't go outside now because like nobody wears a mask. I don't go outside for other reasons. Now I'm like totally agoraphobic. Like everything is inside, so now the inside is my life. So I need to work on walking. But yeah, I think like that. I don't think that like excluding anything that is exclusive as opposed to inclusive, I think has bad karma, you know, and I think it will come around.
I meant it more as like a counterpart to, not to get too political theory-ish, but Montesquieu has this theory of like things that will motivate people and the spirit of the laws. And one of them is like in a system without money, or in which the money you can acquire is capped. So he had this as like a monarchy. He was like, no one can be richer than the king. So you can only acquire so much. Basically, he argued that people will then substitute that same social reward for honor and like being seen as honorable and respectable within that system, because that is the only way you can get recognition. So rather than us all recognizing Jeff Bezos as the richest person in the world, it'd be like you recognize whoever like won the Nobel Peace Prize for like being super cool that year. It's more that like people will play for different kinds of social rewards. And so that was more what I was thinking. And that the shame would be more that like you did something dishonorable, not so much like, oh, you shouldn't be allowed like in part of this collective, you know?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people that don't want to wear a mask, at least, so like people that I know that like my dad will wear one, but then like his brother like doesn't want to because it's like a, you know, it's not cool. Like I feel like he's worried about being excluded, or like he's getting a reverse mask shaming, right? Where he doesn't want to wear it because he, you know, they're gonna be like, you're like a liberal, you're wearing the mask. So, sorry.
Can I ask a quick question? Just because I think you'd be really interested in this, Nicole. Have you read, there's a book called A Lot of People Are Saying. It came out last year. It's mostly about like Trump and the conspiracy theory era. But there's a whole section in it that basically makes this argument that like liberals and conservatives loosely grouped, because, you know, American political parties are a mess, but like loosely grouped, basically live in different societies at this point. And that's why conspiracy has been like so effective, is because we are not all operating on the same norms and the same basis for truth. And I was just like, it makes so much more sense, because it's so tempting to be like, no, these people are crazy, but like they're not really. They just really do have a fundamentally different understanding of like how the society we live in works.
Like literally different information from like from sources. This is never watch television ever again. Don't watch news on television. I hate it so much, because like they use all these visuals and they trick you into being like, yes, this is real, and it's just production value anyway. It's whatever. But anyway, it's nice that like there's a little bit more like acknowledgement of like anyone who's like grown up like, you know, in a family that like does the whole like Fox News conservative universe. Like, I mean, I guess Breitbart happened after I moved out, so I don't really remember that. I didn't know that, but like, it is a different universe. Yeah. And it's nice to like, kind of like for people to kind of notice, like you can talk to them, like when you talk to people, right? Like there's all kinds of possibility, because like there's nothing, there's like not a single thing like that they think is real about like what you think is real. So there's plenty to work with, because then you're just like, oh, is that what you told? Like what you were told? This is what I was told. Here are my notes. And then maybe you can like prove it, but then like it's really just more about being personable, I think. And they can like see that you're a human being. Getting into research is really great, because then you can just be like, oh no, I actually my friend worked on that and she interviewed everyone and was there. And they're like, oh, okay. Because it's not like a mystery source. You're like, no, I physically like, you know, someone I personally know was there, witnessed like the kids being in cages or whatever, you know, and then they're able to like, I guess, contextualize it with like a bit of humanity, as opposed to it being like, you know, whatever boogeyman.
Back to your question, or back to your comment, Sarah, about changing the way in which we incentivize environmental justice reform and environmental reforms. I think that we've tried to do that collectively, and I think it's been met with kind of mixed results. We tried to do that with the Paris Agreement, for example, and we are one of, I believe, 2 or 3 countries that are not part of it, are not part of the Paris Agreement anymore. And so I think that right now, what a lot of countries around the world, and in the United States, our country specifically, what we're dealing with is mixing isolationism versus internationalism, and that's actually a pretty big discussion as it relates to not only international relations, but also NGOs, multinational corporations. All of this has a role in that discussion, and I think that we're seeing in a lot of different countries, including Brazil, including Austria, including the United States. We're seeing a lot of isolationist moves that I think is unfortunately counterproductive in a lot of different ways, but also counterproductive to the collective spirit that I believe is needed to affect these environmental changes on a global scale. So I don't really know what the best solution or the best way to start reversing that is, but I've noticed that really since about 2010 was when we started to see that shift, and it's gotten increasingly apparent over the last couple of years, in my opinion. So I don't know what the real solution to that is, or if there's I know for a fact there's not an easy solution, but what the best path forward would be from here.
I have thoughts, but somebody else can talk. No. Sarah?
I can tag in. I obviously agree. I think that environmental action should be international because it kind of has to be. No one has control over how, fossil fuels will orbit the earth, but they will. And it will very much affect, the poles disproportionately, but all of us a lot. And yeah, I think, again, this is one of those things that, no problem of this magnitude has easy solutions. But I do think that it would be useful if we could talk more critically about that, leaving the Paris Climate Agreement isn't just a way to be F off to Obama, and isn't just a way to be F off to all of our allies in Europe, as withdrawing all of these troops from NATO is starting this week as well. There definitely is an angle of that, but we can also acknowledge hey, the US is counterproductive, is not being a good faith actor internationally. And if you could pin that on this administration and basically be we should elect people who have substantive and meaningful internationalist platforms. It's hard to know how that would go for you politically because of, deep state nonsense, but you really do have to think about how much is there available to pressure these people into acknowledging that hey, it really does matter that we're gonna have all of these massive problems from climate change, and the amount of fossil fuel CO2 emissions from the US is disproportionately larger than the average person on Earth, and therefore you have an outsized responsibility because you have contributed in excess of what would be anticipated to this crisis.
I think, I don't know. I think a lot of it, it's just that's not even a political, to some degree, that's not even a political question right now. I think our current problems at home in the US are just so bad that that's not even that doesn't even rank on the list of things that are happening, like in most people's minds. I definitely agree that it's one of the most important things we should be doing. But like, we're like so close. Our democracy itself is in crisis. So the idea that you could elect someone who could solve these things is so, it's like so far away from where we even are, which is awful.
Yeah.
I just kind of connected. I don't know where this thought came from, but I was thinking about like this idea that, the young people are going to come in and they're going to change society and everything's going to be okay. But I just looked at Fox News's demographics, and 25% of their viewers are between 18 and 35, which is not what I thought that number was going to be.
That's changed.
It's different from it used to be. This is a 2019 poll, or 2018, which is very scary. I don't know. It's just like, how do we talk about these things? How do we convince people that these things even matter when they're being told that it's all like a conspiracy? It's a very difficult problem.
As someone, can I tag in real quick, Nicole? As someone who did government work on climate, my goodness, talk about a job. You really have to get at things that people understand concretely. So like I worked on the Great Lakes and being like, hey, isn't it weird that you can't catch as many fish this year? Like, because Fish and Wildlife Service says they're not safe. Or like, hey, isn't it weird that this shoreline doesn't look the same as it does in a Google Maps photo from 6 years ago? Like, there are meaningful ways, especially if it's something personal to someone, that you can talk about it, but it can be really difficult sometimes. But that was the thing I learned the most about, is like when I first started doing these town halls, I'd be like, but look at this graph, like look at how bad it looks. And they were like, they're like, I don't know what you do. They're like, I don't know what like linear regression nonsense this, like, they're like, this means nothing to them. But if you can be like, hey, all 5 of the Great Lakes last summer had their highest levels of all time. And you can be like, that's really weird, right? That's a huge amount of water. What does that say about how things are changing? People are like, oh, that is really weird. Like, they're like, no one can make water, so it must be coming from somewhere. And you're like, yeah, that's bad, right? And if you can be like, see, that's an indicator that the climate isn't the same as it used to be. Or like, hey, like this pier is now underwater. There are ways to meaningfully make those connections, but you often have to go to a really hyper personal level of like, oh, I see you like to fish, or oh, I know that you really enjoy saltwater tubing or something, and like or skiing, or like lots of people have things that they enjoy about the outdoors, and almost all of those things have changed in the last 20 years, like based on where you can go skiing, or like what the skiing season is. Like there are all sorts of ways to be like, oh wow, like, and that can be a really easy entry point for people who are like, well, climate doesn't have anything to do with me. Or worse, the people who are like, I think it would be really nice if where I lived was hotter. I don't see what the big deal is. Because I have definitely met those people. Oh my gosh, living in Canada, everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna get warmer. Woo, so exciting. And you were like, no, this is really bad.
Something else I just want to bring up is like, it's really important work to be changing people's minds, like on the like moment to moment basis. But we've seen that doesn't actually lead to a change in policy necessarily right now. And so like we have to solve 2 problems at once. We have to change people's opinions, but also make people's opinions actually matter in terms of what public policy is going to be. And that's, both of those are really difficult problems. But Sarah, that's a really great example that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that is like one of the fundamental findings of like everything that we know about climate activism is like centering your story, and like what is your personal experience, and like really letting that kind of shine through. Um, and I wanted to touch a little bit on Aidan, what you were saying about the changing demographics of like Fox News and like young people, and thinking that young people will like be really active and like save everything. That is such an interesting thing to bring up, because like our whole thing is like we put youth like into the UN, like just get in there. And it goes to a couple of like concepts uh of so like young people, right? Like it is 100% true that like the reason why you need young people is because we have energy, and we are like we're able to like look at a problem and like be able to kind of like be really present with like what the reality is, and we're not kind of like remembering like a fondness of something that doesn't exist anymore. And that's an incredibly important like gift, I guess, or like skill to bring to the conversation, to be able to like look at reality and be like, no, actually we need to have this, these are the metrics that we have to use, and we cannot negotiate, we need these things right now. And then what I think is interesting about what's going on with Fox News, and something that I know about having worked and done like the CSW stuff, is that the role, like once we're not young people anymore, is to support and like foster like young people as much as we can, and like do like whatever mentorship is possible. And then it can be like this you know, important relationship, right, between like people that were here a few years ago, giving young people the information that they need in order to like advance and move the ball forward. Because the fact that we're even able to like know that you have to center your story in order to move people from, you know, the spectrum of like climate awareness, right? Because you have it's not real to it is real, but it's not, humans aren't responsible, to humans are responsible. And like we are able to kind of like use personal information and structuring stories in order to get people moving kind of like down the pike like from wherever they are. And like that has changed, right? I've seen that change, and like that's the value that I hope to be able to bring like as I get older, because I'm 30, right? And so 35 is the cutoff, you're not young anymore. So saith the UN and many other organizations. And so I really feel like such an exciting time to kind of like have that perspective and understand that it's never over, you know, especially as it comes to policies that get decided. Like people have never, like the American people have never been able to vote like in this country, right? Like lots of people can't vote, you know, and are not listened to.
Millions
and
and millions of people.
Yeah. To this day, for a variety of reasons, many of them racist. And then also like what is like citizenship as well, right? So like there's all these ways that have always existed to make sure that the people that are most affected by things don't have any say in like their lives, right? And so agency and like consent and governance and self-governance, like these are things that we will always have always and currently have to work on. And it's never going to end. But what's cool about that is that you never run out of work to do. You'll always have a job. Congratulations. There will always be problems. They may not pay great. You can definitely do things with your life. So that's good. And I think that, you know, what we're seeing, and why I brought up CSW is because a lot of people and organizations do foster youth, right? And that's what they're doing. Like they're fostering young people. They're saying, hey, listen, like, what are these things that you're interested in? You know, we're going to like, you know, shift a lot of our narrative to get you into here, because everybody needs to have the wheel going, right? That's how like power happens. And like how you can like, you know, grow it. So I guess I'm not that worried. I think we have a lot more ways like to kind of like foster and grow young people like in reality, as opposed to like maybe like a small version of reality. I don't really know like what Fox News is like. I'm not scared, you know, because like it's not real. And like I was able to see it. I grew up in that and was like, this isn't real. And I was able to like leave it. So, and I'm not like a genius, you know, I'm just like a product of Louisiana. So I think that, you know, when it comes to climate, there's reality. And I think that as long as we have older people, you know, extending and supporting younger people who are able to bring their perspective and like fight really hard. And it's this, you know, like this is our legacy and this is our relationship with each other. And like, this is how we survive and how we will, you know, be able to make it, even though Like, I don't know what humanity is going to look like in the future. I don't know what society is going to look like in the future. I know it'll be different, whether or not like we meet like whatever goals we need to meet. Maybe we miss some, even though I do think that, especially as we go to 2030, we are adamant and we are not flexible, and we say, this is what we need. You got to be flexible because this is what the planet needs. So this is what we got to do. This is the end of the line. So it's just that determination, and then like having everything else be flexible around whatever, you know, we got to do what we got to do. So those are my things. Young people saying this is what we need, and older people being like, okay, cool, what do you need in order for us to do it? And everybody being flexible around like what needs to happen. So I've said a lot of words.
I agree.
Cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think.
Oh no, go for it, Aidan.
I think that I am afraid, and I think that a certain amount of fear is healthy and important. I think that we do need to be able to imagine the worst case, like even, you know, obviously not to the point of like provoking anxiety in ourselves or anything like that, but I think we do need to be like, the way things are going is disastrous, and we can't imagine that, oh, it's just going to be solved, you know, like just because it's too big of a thing, it's too scary of a thing. I think we do need to sit down and like really actually be a little scared, because you know, at the end of the day, like these things are coming, and if stuff doesn't get done, it's going to be really, really bad.
I think the problem is that I think that fear motivates like a lot of people to like act, right? And the important thing is that every single person on the planet is going to have to work really hard all of the time. Like, and they have to, because otherwise we will all die. So how do we get people to work really hard all of the time, or else we die, right? Like kind of telling them that, like, you see, there's zombies a coming. Like, you know, you got to run from the zombies. And I think that when it comes to people that have like a lot of money and power, they're able to kind of do a terrible practice, which is they're able to like avoid a lot of problems that a lot of other people have to deal with, you know? And like, just like, and then in the absence of like the problems that everybody else has to deal with, they create new problems, because everybody loves problems. If we don't have them, we just make them up. So, and like that ingenuity has been used to create like machines that make lots of money, right? And like, so I guess the desire for like creating and solving our own problems, like that could be used for like making a different machine, a human survival machine instead. So I think fear, it depends. Like, I think people have different relationships with fear.
That's true. But I do think it plays an important role. What were you going to say, Sarah?
Yeah. Tagging on to that, I was going to say something similar, in that like I think it is meaningful to have discussions about like how like it looks like the climate crisis will affect local communities. I found that like in terms of getting like fear motivated like kind of action, like I grew up in Phoenix, and Phoenix is going to run out of water. And like, this is something we've known about my entire life. It is a thing that is even more true now than when I was a kid. But if you sit someone down and are like, we're going to run out of water in 20 years, like that is that's soon for anyone my age. They're like, what? I would be 42 in 20 years. It's like, you know, and
not only that, they'll just say like, I'll move.
Yeah, well, true, but like, then you're like, where are you going to move 5 million people just from Phoenix?
That's what I'm saying, man. Like, that's my dad's whole thing, right? Because like we live in southern Louisiana. We're like, oh, well, we'll just have to move. That's not a solution. You can't move forever. You know, you can't avoid consequences to your actions forever. You know, like there are consequences to your actions.
I know we need to wrap up, but I just want to, I don't know how many people have seen this. There's people know who Ben Shapiro is, I assume. Right-wing troll monster. But he was talking about climate change and he was like, oh yeah, the climate level, the sea levels are going to raise. Well, what do when that happens? Your home's going to be underwater, so you just sell it and you move somewhere else. Who are you selling your home to, Ben?
Yeah, it's prime real estate underwater.
Oh my gosh.
Mermaids,
Anyway.
the mermaid market.
Atlantis 2050. That's the new human project.
Oh no.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see people in California where droughts have been a huge issue, especially in the last 20 years. We've seen historic droughts, but it's been interesting to see people who normally wouldn't care about environmentalism and conservation efforts, especially farmers, that I would say one of the main industries that climate change has affected has been farming in especially the Central Coast where I live in California, but throughout most of California as well, because people are starting to realize that they don't have any water to use to make all the fruit and vegetables that everybody consumes, and that accounts for a large percentage of our state's GDP. And so it's becoming a large issue. And I think that exactly what you were saying, Sarah, it needs to be a localized issue, because people care about things that they know and they can actually conceptualize. When you're talking about a remote area across the world, they might be able to sympathize, but they can't empathize in the same way. They can't really care to the same extent. But when you start to talk about a specific pond or area in your community, then people start to really picture themselves in that loss. And that creates a extremely effective change. So I think that as far as next steps, first there needs to be more youth involved, like you were saying, Nicole. There just needs to be more people to actually be able to get the message across and be able to communicate within their communities. I also think that there's room for technology to actually be able to connect people with some of these issues that are local. And I think that there is a lot of room for growth within that field, so that it connects people who otherwise wouldn't normally think about it. And it connects them to issues that are really important. And I think that grassroots organizations also play a very important role within local communities as well. But I think that there's a lot of work that can be done. But like we were saying a little bit earlier in this in this little chat, it's an exponential problem, and unfortunately, we have years, not decades or centuries. And so
no, 2030, like we have everything, every single one of the SDGs is going to happen. Like that's just a fact.
So we just need to try to be optimistic and be able to conceptualize this seemingly insurmountable problem actually being able to be lessened or even just stopped and reversed within our lifetime. Because I think that with technology and the exponential way that technology works and information works within technology, I think that it is very possible that as the climate is worsening, technology can also meet that demand, and I think there can be room for that. And so I think that this is a very exciting time, a very stressful time, but also a very exciting time.
I know we have to end out. But I just want to quick plug something on the topic of water usage. I actually made a video for Nonviolence for Water Day. But like there's a couple things that a lot of people don't know about what uses water, and it's not like your faucet. Like your faucet, that's like 1% of your water consumption. Probably not literally, but like something like that. Things that really eat water are meat, like a pound of meat. Let me see, this is 1,400 gallons of water to make a quarter-pound hamburger, an order of fries, and a soft drink. 1,400 gallons. A pound of almonds is almost 2,000 gallons of water. Like just, it's an unimaginable amount of water for the almonds.
And milk and more, like dairy milk. So none of this, oh, I don't drink almond milk. Glug, 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 cow juice. Way more than almonds.
Right.
Just wanted to put that on.
Yeah. Cotton also. Cotton is 1,800 gallons of water to make a pair of jeans. Like if you're thinking about like trying to cut down your water consumption, like that's actually something you can do to make a difference. Like that's a case where like personal choices actually maybe can make a difference in terms of like choosing not to consume things with cotton, almonds, meat as much as you can. And then like also like consumer goods, like a car takes like 39,000 gallons.
Stuff secondhand. There is an infinite amount of stuff we have already produced, and that CO2 is already in the atmosphere. Extending its lifetime away from landfill just helps it not produce methane, basically. So.
Oh yeah, and methane's got a good turnaround for transforming it, because carbon stays in the atmosphere for a long time, but like
methane's
I know that
got about a 10-year lifetime in the atmosphere versus carbon dioxide, depending on where it is, can be anywhere from about 100 to like 10,000 if it gets real high up in the stratosphere. So
thank you so much for those deets. I was like, I vaguely know that this is a thing. Okay, so with that, excellent. Thank you. We brought the chemistry. This is excellent. It's 2:07. I'm late for a meeting. This has been a really great break with you guys. I think we solved all the world's problems, and yeah, congratulations to us. And yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Parker and Sarah. Thank you, Aidan, as always. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and see you guys next Wednesday, Internet. Farewell.
Awesome. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.